The vanishing highway. It was a cold, moonless night when Jake decided to take the long route home. The shortcut through the old, winding highway had always been quicker, but tonight, something felt different, something eerie lingered in the air. His friends had warned him about the strange occurrences that plagued the road after midnight, but Jake, ever the skeptic, dismissed their warnings as mere urban legends. As he drove deeper into the forested area, the dense canopy above seemed to swallow the little light his car's headlights provided. The tall, ancient trees lined the highway like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches casting twisted shadows on the cracked asphalt. Jake turned up the radio to drown out the unsettling silence, but all he could get was static. Annoyed, he switched it off and focused on the road ahead. The further he drove, the more isolated he felt. The occasional house he used to see along the highway had disappeared, replaced by endless stretches of trees and darkness. His phone showed no signal, and the car's GPS had long since stopped working, leaving him to navigate the winding road alone. Suddenly, in the distance, Jake spotted a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a woman, her long hair cascading down her back, wearing a flowing white dress that billowed in the slight breeze. She had her thumb out, hitchhiking. Jake hesitated for a moment, recalling every horror movie trope he'd ever seen, but the rational side of him reasoned that leaving someone stranded out here wasn't right. He slowed down and pulled over next to her. Rolling down the window, he leaned out and asked, "Need a ride?" The woman slowly turned her head toward him. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes, dark and hollow, sent a shiver down Jake's spine. But she nodded silently, and Jake unlocked the door. As she slid into the passenger seat, Jake noticed how cold the air had suddenly become. He turned up the heater, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over him. "Where are you headed?" Jake asked, trying to make conversation. "Just ahead," the woman replied in a voice barely above a whisper. "Not far." Jake nodded and continued driving, his grip on the steering wheel tightening with every passing mile. The woman remained silent, staring straight ahead, her expression unreadable. The atmosphere in the car grew tense, the silence oppressive. After what felt like an eternity, Jake noticed a small clearing up ahead. The woman suddenly spoke, her voice sharp and clear this time, "Stop here." Jake complied, pulling over to the side of the road. The woman opened the door and stepped out into the darkness. She turned to face him one last time, her eyes locking with his. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. Then, without another word, she vanished into the trees. Jake sat in the car, his heart pounding in his chest. Something about the encounter felt wrong, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. He glanced at the passenger seat and froze. The seatbelt was still buckled, but there was no sign of the woman. A chill ran down his spine as he realized that the seat had been cold, too cold for someone who had just been sitting there. Panicking, Jake sped off down the highway, his mind racing. What had just happened? Who, or what, had he given a ride to? The road seemed to stretch on endlessly, the trees closing in around him. He could no longer tell if he was going the right way or if he was even on the same highway anymore. Suddenly, his headlights caught something on the road ahead. A car flipped over in a ditch. Smoke billowed from the engine, and Jake could see a figure trapped inside. Without thinking, he slammed on the brakes and rushed out to help. As he approached the wreckage, his blood ran cold. It was his car, the same make, model, and color, with the same license plate. And inside, slumped over the steering wheel, was him. Jake stumbled back, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. How could this be? He was standing here, yet his lifeless body was trapped inside the twisted metal of the car. Panic gripped him as he realized that the woman in white was standing behind him, her expression mournful. "You were supposed to take the other road," she whispered, her voice echoing in the still night air. "I tried to warn you." Before Jake could react, the world around him started to blur, the trees, the road, everything fading into darkness. He felt himself being pulled away. The last thing he saw was his own lifeless eyes staring back at him from the wreckage. Jake awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He was in his bed, safe at home. It had all been a dream, or had it? The memory of the woman in white, the wrecked car, his own body, all of it was so vivid, so real. He checked his phone. The time was just after midnight. He had never driven on the highway. He had fallen asleep right after dinner. But as he got up and walked to the bathroom, he froze in the doorway. There, on the floor, was a scrap of white fabric, stained with blood. This story captures the eerie tension of a night drive gone wrong, with a twist that blurs the lines between reality and nightmare.